These are things
All
I
right.
can help you with.
Right. So thank you, Jordan, for joining us. For those of you who don't know who I am Jenny. I manage the Sport Med BC run walk program, and it's exciting that we have these clinics, or that we've been able to start these clinics this fall, considering how our summer was. There will be a few more webinars throughout this season here. We have another physiotherapist talking about running injuries and prevention. We have a nutritionist coming on board and a strength and conditioning coach as well. So these are things that we'll provide you with throughout the program, but I am going to let Jordan introduce himself right now.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm Jordan. I'm the owner of the New Balance stores locally. So I used to be the downtown store, the Robson store, although that was just sold to New Balance corporate. So the remaining ones under my ownership are the Richmond store, the Delta Surrey store, and then the Langley store. And so you'll see my face around, and yeah, I love talking about shoes and being involved with the in-training program. So today I'm going to talk about running shoes, foot types, and sort of how to choose a shoe. And so hopefully provide some information for everyone that assists you in that search of footwear, because it's sort of complicated, and any additional information that you have going into the stores will help you sort of determine your foot type and know sort of what you're looking for. And at the end, we could do a question period. Happy to talk about individuals' issues and provide any insights that I can on that front. So athletic shoes. A lot of people can go into a shoe store and see a huge wall of shoes and be overwhelmed by the selection of stuff. And it can look all the same to people sometimes, but there are a lot of noticeable difference and subtle differences between athletic shoes that really make them suitable for certain activities. And so I'm going to use a few props, some running shoes, obviously, some foot molds, and try to help visually give you guys a better understanding of things. So athletic shoes could be broken down into sort of three main components, and that is the upper of the shoe, sort of that top part of the shoe, the midsole of the shoe, that foam area of the shoe, and then the sole. And like I said, within the different categories, tennis, basketball, running, soccer, those different components will vary a fair bit. And the defining features of running shoes in terms of the upper is this mesh material. And so obviously with running, you want the ability for the foot to be able to be accommodated well, to splay quite easily, and therefore, and breathe well, dry in between wears. And so that mesh is really a component to running shoes that's paramount. Some other footwear like tennis shoes, they'll use a leather upper. And the reason for that is they need to hold the foot in place when moving side to side. With running, it's mainly just a forward motion, and therefore your foot doesn't do this lateral movement as much. So we really just want the foot to be able to splay and have all these accommodative sort of stretching areas to allow for the foot to swell and not cause pressure points and things of that nature. This model is called the 1080, and it's unique now that it has this called 360-degree stretch. So it really stretches across the forefoot area of the foot and the instep. And so if people have bunions or hammer toes or things of that nature, then having that stretchy upper can really be a benefit. As far as the other major defining feature of running shoes is what you'll see here, and it's this rocker through the forefoot. And so some shoes, like tennis shoes, are very flat in nature. Their sole is quite flat. Running shoes have this pronounced, what's called toe spring or forefoot rocker. And that's designed that way so the foot can roll without even having to bend much. And so running shoes now are really exaggerating that rocker in shoes. And so that's something that you'll see exaggerated between models more and more. Whereas, like I said, the tennis shoe or a basketball shoe that requires more traction on the ground, they need more sole contact on the ground, and that will provide more traction. So when you're moving side to side, that more surface area contact on the ground will help a lot to provide traction and prevent ankles from rolling over. But not as much of a need in running. You just want that rocker through the forefoot to facilitate the running motion. Soles with running shoes vary compared to court shoes. Court shoes have a very flat profile. They have this sort of herringbone sort of pattern to them, whereas running shoes will actually cut away a lot of pieces of the sole to lighten the shoe. Lightness is obviously a benefit to running. They'll also build in these little flex grooves, so they are more flexible. But they'll put the durable areas in the high contact wear areas. So you'll see that rubber in the heel strike area across the forefoot of the shoe, and that prevents sort of that wear from happening in those areas. But quite a different sole compared to like your court shoe, which is totally filled in. This will be heavier, more durable. This will be lighter and then wear well in those high abrasion areas. So with regards to the midsole, this is where the cushioning comes from. This is where that rocker that I talked about is sort of designed. But there's also technologies that we put into the midsole that can help with people's foot mechanics. And so what I'll do now is I'll talk about generally the different foot types that are out there, and have some foot molds that help sort of describe these feet. There is a high arch foot, which I wonder if you guys can see that. You see very high through the instep, on the inside, very high on that arch area of the foot. This is a rigid, what's called a high arched rigid foot, and it tends to roll or favor the outside of the foot, and that motion is called supination. And so some people, not that many, have this foot type, and they roll to the outside too much. And I'll explain some shoes that this foot type needs more of. But before I do that, this is the opposite foot. This is a flat foot. You can see it has no high instep there, and there's almost full contact on the ground. And so this is a flat foot, which is also known as a high flexibility foot. And this foot type tends to overpronate too much. So it collapses inwards too much. And it can get a whole bunch of overuse injuries when you're running and doing thousands of steps over 10K distances 3-4 times a week. So if you have this foot type, we need certain technologies and shoes that can help with that tendency to control that overpronation. And then there's sort of your average arch height. So if you have the average foot, you're very fortunate, has an average height to the arch, has a little bit of height through this area. And this foot type, less prone to bunions, less prone to hammer toes and things of that nature, and generally don't have too many foot issues. I'm going to hold up a little slide here as well, see if you guys could see that. Yeah. So this is the high arched foot and how you can see that angle rotates to the outside. This is this neutral foot that sort of the alignment is straight up and down. And then this is the overpronated foot. You can see how that foot's collapsing inwards on that inside. So just helps another visual see those differences. And just one last slide here as well. This is just that looking at that foot that tends to overpronate too much. This person actually has an orthotic underneath the foot, which is controlling that overpronation. But this is how that foot would look if you're looking behind somebody and their arch is collapsing inwards. And so that's that flatter, more flexible, overly pronated foot. So when we hear about pronation, we sometimes think, oh, that's a bad thing. And it isn't. The arch absorbs shock by collapsing. And so it works like a little bit of a shock absorber. So an average arch foot does that really well. The high arch foot is a rigid foot. It actually doesn't pronate very much at all. It tends to supinate more. So it doesn't cushion itself well. And so with that high arch foot, we actually need to really get cushioning from our shoes. The average arch foot just needs to be supported well for cushioning, but doesn't need any correction. Whereas the more flexible, overly pronated foot, that foot type collapses inwards, so it pronates, but then it overpronates. And then it causes that alignment issue that leads to more pressure on the inside of on the big toe joint, which can help lead to bunions. Plantar fasciitis, it stretches out the plantar fascia, which is sort of what makes up the arch. And so we want to control that overpronation with that foot. So if people have that foot type, they really want to make sure that they are getting the correct footwear. And the correct footwear for that foot type is what's referred to as stability shoes. And so this is a model called New Balance's 860. And what they do, and it's a little bit bothersome now with brands, they're getting so cosmetic that they're actually taking out some of the things that would indicate whether this shoe was posted or not. All posted shoes that were designed for pronation control at one time would put a gray foam on the inside, and that would help visualize that different density, that firmer density of foam on the inside to help with that tendency to pronate too much. So we want to stop that from collapsing inwards too much. And so what brands will do is they'll put these posts on the inside. And so this shoe actually has a harder foam on the inside than the outside. And so when that foot is pronating a little too much all the time, and if this was a neutral shoe, after 1 month, it might be like that. After 2 months, it might be like that. All of a sudden, the shoe's exacerbating that already biomechanical issue that's happening. And then it really leads into the trouble. So essentially, with those overpronated feet, we want these posting technologies. Another example of that is New Balance's 940 series, which is, this one's a little bit more visual. You can see it has these gray little lines on the inside there. And that's a denser foam as well. And it's filled in through that arch side. So for somebody that has a very excessively pronated foot, so it collapses in a lot, the 940 would be a terrific shoe for that. If there's a bit more mild to moderate overpronation, the 860 with its post on the inside is good for controlling that as well. So as far as that, like I said, there's the overly pronated foot that needs stability shoes, and those stability features are posting technologies. That high arch foot, actually much less common. So that really rigid foot that I showed you, that's like 5 to 7% of the population. So they just need a lot of volume for their instep and thicker, what's referred to as stacks. So the midsole thickness of a shoe is referred to as the stack. And people that need more cushion need a thicker stack. People that also need a bit more support need thicker stacks as well. So one of the main things that you can look at in shoes to identify whether they may be appropriate for you is that thickness of that midsole. Some shoes, like the 1400 here, this is a bit more of a racing shoe. This shoe has a thinner stack to it. And so why would we want a thinner stack? Well, for lightness. And lightness, if people don't need corrective technologies in their shoes and they're doing tempo runs or faster runs and they're doing shorter distances, then a model like the 1400 would be excellent for those individuals. But if you're a 220-pound guy that has a tendency to overpronate, this would be the worst thing you could get into. You blow it out in a month and a half's time. And this shoe can be as expensive as this shoe, but you're not going to get the wear and the durability you want or the support that you want. So stack is just a really important consideration. And a lot of people like the look of thin stack shoes because they're lighter, they're a little more tapered in the toe box and things like that. But stay away unless you have a lighter body type, good foot mechanics, and or you are an average body type with good foot mechanics. You can have your training shoe, which would be a bit more like an 880 series that's a little thicker, and this would be your race shoe. So if you're really into running, people sometimes have a multitude of shoes, and in that situation, they'd have their tempo shoe and then their training shoe. You don't want your training mileage on a thinner stack shoe because you're just going to wear it out quicker. Okay. So like I said, the other thing that is something you want to take into consideration is your body type. So we talked about your foot type, whether it's a more flexible overpronated foot or neutral foot or a high arch foot. Just as much of a concern with that is body type. So if we have a leaner body type compared to a heavier set body type, the heavier set body type is just going to increase those forces on the foot. So if you have a heavy set person with a bit of mild pronation, you may need to increase the amount of support or correction in your shoes to accommodate that. Whereas if you're a lighter weight person and you tend to overpronate, because if you're 80 pounds and you overpronate, you may be still fine in a neutral shoe with a thicker stack, because it's just a thicker stack inherently gives a little bit more support. And because you're not as much forces on the foot with that lighter body type, you may not be overpronating quite as much because of that. So body type really plays a part in this as well. So foot mechanics, body type, shoe components. The other thing that I could talk about is also just my favorite shoes in the line, and what shoes to look for if you're in one of the stores and you're wanting a model number from me. So the 880 series from New Balance, they make a whole bunch of different colors of this one. They're available in narrow through wide widths in certain colors. It has what we refer to as a sort of a medium stack thickness shoe. So good cushioning. It's a neutral shoe if you have a neutral foot mechanics, and it's one of the best-selling shoes. I think actually in North America, it's the best-selling running shoe in independent running shoe stores. So all the technical running shoe stores, that's the #1 selling series, the 880. So if you have a neutral foot, that's a great one to get into. The 1080 is our top-end model. It has fresh foam for cushioning the midsole, so super cushioned midsole. Has that 360-degree stretch. If you like the most cushioned, thickest stack shoe, and don't mind the extra price, the 1080 is a great one to get into. Like I said, with stability shoes, our best-selling models are the 860. So they put that posting on the inside to control the overpronation. But easily our best-selling of the stability shoes for overpronation is the 860. But if you need a lot of aggressive correction, the 940 is another one to look at. And then, lighter weight runner, if you're looking for shorter distances, I'd say just about 5 of the top 10 finishers in all of 10Ks marathon events tend to wear the 1400. Huge following with that shoe, so a great one as well. Oh, I'll also bring up this one. So this technology in running, you'll hear a lot about graphite plates now. So with Nike, New Balance, they are putting in graphite plates in shoes that help with basically that acceleration of the foot. These shoes, you can sort of liken it to when people, like there's, what's the name of the guy? I'm drawing a blank here. That was the Australian runner that had the amputee legs, and he had the carbon fiber legs built. Basically, they allowed this flexing to happen, which accelerated the body. And essentially, that's sort of what's going on in here. They have a graphite plate built into the shoes. So it jumps the price up of the shoes significantly. They're $260, but there are people that are at that level that want to shave off minutes off their marathon time and are willing to invest in shoes to do it. And so they're thick stack shoes in order to put those graphite plates in it. And that graphite plate has a little bit of a curve to it, and it has some flex, and it helps in propulsion through the forefoot. So if you hear some hype about that, then it is real hype, but for most people, they don't need to shave off a few minutes off their times and invest in the pricey shoes. But for those sponsored athletes, professional runners, they're getting into those products a fair bit.
So if you're someone who's fairly new to running or maybe starting out, you wouldn't notice much of a difference if you went into one of those and paid an extra $100.
It is a unique experience. It actually does feel quite unusual, the rock that you get from them. And because the sole is actually stiff, there's a unique sort of feel to that. But yeah, it's the vast majority of people are still going into the conventional shoe. But and there's no stability technologies in them for overpronation or things like that. I will also bring up, there are some things, if people have problem feet, my wife has arthritis in her big toe, super active person, played a lot of tennis over years, a lot of running, and she has now arthritis in her big toe. And there's some conditions out there that some people, a lot of women deal with, which is called hallux limitus. So the big toe joint starts to become less flexible. And you can actually even get to a point where you get hallux rigidus, which is that toe doesn't bend at all. And there's a lot of arthritis in the joint. And these people are in an enormous amount of pain, usually been very active people, and that's why that joint's wearing out. And all of a sudden, they can't run anymore. They can't be as active as they like. And so New Balance has a series called the More series. And it works a tiny bit like this, and this is what brought it up. This doesn't have a graphite plate in it, but contrary to traditional running shoes that are very flexible in the forefoot with that rocker, these actually are stiff. And so what that does is it immobilizes that joint to be like this, but it allows it to roll off. So it reduces the amount of flexion that's required of that joint, and it just allows the shoe to roll. And so it's been a really innovative technology in footwear now, and it's helping a lot of people with foot trouble be more active again. And I love putting somebody that's having foot trouble into that shoe. These guys also do, and New Balance's claim to fame is our widths. They will do a B, a D, and a double E width. So if some woman has a really arthritic joint and their foot's quite wide because of that, we can accommodate that foot super well in a shoe like this, not only from the structural issue, but even the fit issue. And so just because you may have struggled in the past trying to get the proper fit of footwear, there's a lot more options now. And they deal with stuff outside of this, just foot mechanic issues. It can be metatarsal issues, ball of the foot issues with all those joints in that area. So if you're having problems with your feet, absolutely go into a store that knows what they're talking about and tell them all the issues you're having, and we can problem solve with that. And then lastly, so arch supports. Some people have customized orthotics, and arch supports, just like with that little poster that I showed. This is a person that has an orthotic in there, and you can see how it's correcting that overpronation. So orthotics lift the arch to control the tendency to overpronate too much. They also, if people just like the feeling of more arch support, they have a higher arch, they can get into them and they get more contact, and it spreads their weight out throughout the footbed. But the big thing with orthotics is you don't want to get into corrective shoes like a 940 with an orthotic, because this is correcting and this is correcting, and you can get overcorrection. When shoes first started building corrective technologies, a lot of podiatrists were recommending them with orthotics, and people were getting overcorrected and getting all these outside hip issues, IT band issues as your shoes broke down. So if your shoes look like this, then there's something wrong as far as it could be too corrective for you. It could be that you have an insole and a corrective shoe. So you want your shoes more looking neutral rather than this way or this way. But if you have an orthotic, buy a neutral shoe, buy a shoe that has a thicker stack and has the volume to accommodate it. All our shoes have removable insoles, and with those different widths, it should be really easy to accommodate an orthotic in a shoe. But if you find that just shoes, all the ones you try don't work for you, you can now start trying insoles. There's a huge amount of insoles on the market. New Balance license with Superfeet a line of insoles, and they provide this corrective posting, which is like a mini orthotic here, and then they have a top cover that's nice and flexible and cushioned there. And so this does the correction that's necessary for some of those overpronation type issues, which I find are the most helped foot type with insoles.
How long does an insole like that last for, would you say?
The technology of those insoles, like I find you can have 3 pairs of shoes in an insole, like for an insole for like 3 years almost.
Okay.
The technology in an insole is always better than the technology from an insole in a shoe. An insole in a shoe, really, the cushioning and structure is the midsole. The insole, there's really not a lot there. It's a little bit of a cushion device. So it fills up some of the seams and imperfections at the bottom of the shoe, provide a little bit of cushioning, but this doesn't play a big part. So this will always, even worn and worn like for like 3 years, will still have better support than this would. Yeah, insoles can get expensive, but when you compare them to orthotics, like this is an insole that we really like. It's called Need. It's like Sole. There's a very popular brand called Sole that we sold a lot, but it's just a little narrower in the heel cup for women. So I find that it actually helps the heel fit for women's feet a little bit more because the Sole ones are a little wide and they stretch that out and people find they get a little bit of heel slip. But and has a little bit more flexibility than Sole, which I find is a little bit more accommodative. People find it works a little better. I don't recommend insoles all the time, but I just find that there are some feet that really do benefit from it, and you find that out in the fitting process. Okay. So mileage, how often to replace your shoes? They say sort of 500 kilometers, somewhere in there. I like to actually remove the insole of the shoe and write down the date that I actually bought them with like a Jiffy marker, especially if you have 2 shoes that are the same colors, because a lot of times you start mixing those things up. But yeah, if you're replacing your shoes, if you're an avid runner, if it's on the 6 to 8 month sort of basis, you're doing totally fine. But if you're running for an hour, 3 times a week, then you can get a year out of a shoe and be fine. But if you have foot mechanic issues, then when things start to break down for somebody that overpronates a lot, they may start feeling more pain and may want to replace that a little sooner than somebody with just a straight neutral foot type.
If you're someone who maybe not run, but you're a walker who walks several times a week, would you say that the shoes wear out as soon or as a runner? Right. Considering that the impact is not as high? Yeah. No, I'd say there's obviously just mileage, and so if you're walking every day on the shoe, it's hard on shoes.
that hour of running is definitely harder than that hour of walking. But if you're walking with that shoe for and keeping it on, wearing it regularly, then it's definitely going to break down sooner. So it's good to keep. I know there's a lot of runners that have their running shoe that they keep for their running, and once it stops feeling, once it's taken its toll, they'll actually demote it to like their walking shoe, and then demote it further to like their gardening shoe after that. So keep your running shoe for running. But walking, it brings up a good point. Walking, there's a category of walking which people think, well, it's the category of walking. I walk, I should buy a walking shoe. But really, running shoes are much better if you're an athletic power walker than walking shoes are. Walking shoes are pretty well a category that designates sort of a leather upper, more conservative looking shoe. There aren't that many athletic walking shoes within the walking category that are suitable for really power walking. There's a few that are coming out there, but the vast majority are more just a conservative leather upper shoe, and or an outdoor type shoe that's that's leather, but it doesn't have the rocker sole, the more contemporary materials on the upper for that stretch and things like that. So if anybody's a runner but also power walks, then buy running shoes. They're better.
Okay. Are you good to take some questions? Kelly's
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you bet.
Kelly's posted here in the chat. She's wondering if it's helpful if someone brings their old shoes in for when they're buying
it is. And actually, I'll put this little slide up here as well. This shows wear patterns. So you can see this high arch foot is going to expect wear in those areas. This flat foot is going to expect more wear under the big toe and in that sort of heel area. This is actually severe. You usually don't see the inside of the heel. It's more that is the wear that you'd see with an overpronator. Everybody sort of heel strikes on the outside of the foot. And then if they're overpronating too much, they're rolling over at the end of their gait. And so wear pattern will help. And that's what I like to do is when somebody first comes in, I get them to stand in front of me. I get them to bend their knees. And by bending the knees, it just loads the arch. A lot of people unconsciously hold their feet up when they're standing in front of you. When you get them to bend their knees, all of a sudden that foot just gets loaded. And often that's when the pronation is visible. Then you get them to walk away from you, towards you, and you can see if that flexibility of that foot is showing overpronation or supination. In addition to those things, so I'm building, okay, I'm feeling more comfortable about my assessment. Now, if all of a sudden I look at the bottom of somebody's shoe and they show all that wear on the inside, and I've seen the collapse inwards and walking away and back, they show a flexible overpronated foot, then I just know for sure I got an overpronated foot. So wear pattern does help. But disregard almost heel wear. A lot of people think because they wear the back of the heel that they might supinate. But everybody pretty well heel strikes when they first land on the ground. And then the foot rolls through its gait and through that forefoot. So sort of disregard this, but then really look at the forefoot area for wear. If you're also trying to figure out, is my shoe worn out? I will sometimes push my fingers through that forefoot area of the sole. And if you really feel flexibility in this area, softness in that area, it generally is indicating that resiliency is lost and it's losing its cushioning. Whereas the heel, they're so thick, it's really hard to actually make any impression there. Whereas that forefoot, if I can feel my fingers through there, the shoe's shot. And so that's a good test to determine the life that's in your shoe.
Okay. We have another question. So would you recommend a neutral shoe with an insert, or just a shoe with a higher support for someone who overpronates?
It's a good question. I like not modifying shoes as much. if I can buy the shoe off the rack that is suited for my foot type, and I'm not putting in insoles or things like that, I just find the volume of them tends to fit better more often. But there's certain times where just insoles are better if we're not achieving the level of pronation control that we want in our shoe. Or if somebody's excessively pronated, but when we put on the appropriate corrective shoe, it's just too stiff on their foot, too heavy on the foot, then we can go to a less corrective shoe or even a neutral shoe with a corrective insole. And so you could go, instead of a 940 for correction, you could maybe go to an 880, which is a much nicer feeling shoe, but with a corrective insole. So, so those are two different ways of dealing with the same issue. Corrective insoles, neutral shoes to a corrective shoe. And I think just experimenting there is best. It's funny, some people do not like their foot being manipulated. And so lifting the arch, like if I get people that are like, oh, that just feels, I can't stand that. It just feels so awkward in my foot. Whereas some people you put into corrective insoles and they're like, oh, that feels so much better. So it's really unusual. I can't look at somebody and say, that person's gonna like the feeling of arch support. But really people are quite adamant quite often, one way or the other.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations for people with knee problems or knee pain? Yeah,
I think with knee pain, it's just try to make sure that you are in a thicker stack shoe. And also make sure you're being looked at as far as those mechanics. If there's overpronation, the knees follow the feet, and therefore more stress on the inside of the knees. If the knees, if the foot mechanics are fine, then it could be that there could be some other structural things that are going on there as well. We could talk a little bit about running technique and how to reduce stress on the feet and the knees from a technique standpoint. It's a huge topic.
Ah, sorry, Jordan.
Oh, did you lose me?
Yeah, sorry. I was
okay.
We got some we got some issues with the sound, but I think that's fine. So
did we get hacked by a Russian?
All right.
Are we good?
Yes.
We're good? Okay. I don't know how much you heard of that one.
Sorry. So I didn't hear much of the knee problem.
Okay. Yeah. So the knee one, just make sure, have the foot mechanics taken a look at. Make sure that there's nothing about foot mechanics that is an issue. If the shoes foot mechanics are fine, then it could be technique. I really encourage people to try to run with a little bit shorter strides and quicker steps. And it's not about hitting the heel area of the foot, coming down longer strikes and hitting the heel. It's about landing more on the midfoot of the foot and a little bit shorter, quicker strides. There's just less forces that come down there. Minimus shoes or super thin soled shoes, the technique to run with that type of footwear was quicker, shorter strides. Yeah, that technology brought to the forefront a type of running technique that does lessen the stress on the feet and the knees. And that is, if everything else is fine, you're getting knee pain, then maybe look into just how to have a little bit of a quicker, shorter stride. It doesn't mean you have to run faster. It just means you have to turn over your feet a little quicker. And there's just less of those longer lunges that the legs have to do with that shock.
Okay.
So I hope that it's a simple sort of summary of something that could be a longer topic.
Yeah. Finally, what about socks? Is there
Yeah,
any
socks, I was
personal?
going to mention it, and maybe we want to do a talk on apparel and things like that at another time. But socks, for sure, get away from cotton. All the synthetics, they're really good now. They're moisture wicking. Don't get them too low. Get them just a little bit higher so they protect the Achilles area of the foot, because the shoes are quite deep now, and you want that sock to just come above there. Some people even like the crew heights. That's a total personal preference, but you just want synthetics. They don't absorb moisture. They wick moisture away, and they prevent chafing from happening. And so way less blisters and things like that. I play a lot of court sports. I actually double up on my socks. And so I have a thin sock and a little thicker sock, and the two just reduce abrasion. So if you find that you get a lot of blisters, even with synthetics, then get a super thin synthetic and put it underneath the other sock, and the friction will happen between the two socks, and it can make a big difference for people if they're struggling that way.
Great tip. All right. Does anybody else have any questions? None of them are coming up. All right. I think maybe that's it. Do you have anything else to add?
I don't think so. I think I covered all the stuff I wanted to cover. Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure I forgot something, but we can leave it at that.
Thank you. That was super informative. I thought that was really great.
My pleasure.
So yeah, we've recorded it and we'll post it. So
okay.
View it.
Thanks everyone. My email, I'll maybe just mention jordan@theshoefitter.ca. So JORDAN @theshoefitter.ca.
Let me write that.
Happy to answer questions for people. If you're really struggling with certain things and just want somebody that's a bit more, has a bit more experience on stuff, happy to answer those emails. If you're ever in a New Balance store and you just you have a challenging foot and you just want a little bit more experience, and I'm not there, then feel free to ask for a manager or assistant manager. Obviously, we get a certain amount of turnover with our floor staff, and they're trained well, but the people that will be one level above that are managers, assistant managers. So by all means, if you want more information, no problem at all requesting to have one of those associates help you.
Great. Good to know. Thank you.
Okay.
Have a nice evening, everyone.
Okay. Bye.
See you later. Bye.